Nina, thank you so much for joining us here on New Mexico in
here.
Focus. You were a TEDx ABQ speaker in 2011, and you said at that time you realized most of your life you were leading from your masculine side. What does that mean?
Well, what it meant to me, Megan, was that I relied heavily on my own capacity to take charge, to know what needed to be done and do it or initiate it, to really look towards my sort of linear skills, my capacity to write a business plan, my math skills, my organizational skills. And I wasn't really, what I realized at that time was that I hadn't been using what I saw as my feminine side. And so I really hadn't been paying attention to any sort of creative insights that came up. I hadn't been listening as much as I might be in leadership. I had been talking certainly more than I was listening. And I wasn't really paying attention to synchronicity or intuition or any other aspects of myself. So in my inner lexicon, I had been leaning on my masculine side and not really using my feminine side.
But those were the values that society values.
Well, exactly.
Sorry, the qualities that society values.
Exactly, which was why I realized that I had naturally and of necessity leaned on them. So it wasn't that I was feeling badly. I just realized that I didn't feel in balance with myself, and that there were aspects of who I was that I really wanted to bring into my leadership, and that in order to do that, I had to get conscious about a lot of choices that I had been making that I think I had made subliminally, and because the culture sort of inclined me towards it.
So what are those kinds of values you needed to get in touch with that you think we should be celebrating in terms of leadership?
Well, I've been working with women who are grassroots women leaders for the last 7 or 8 years. And a lot of what I've seen is that women are bringing a whole different set of values into leadership. And among them are the ability to acknowledge when we don't know, that, you can be just as powerful a leader and not know the answer to a question. Or the need to assert boundaries to your leadership. So instead of driving in 5th gear nonstop, that it's okay as a leader to say, I have this much energy and then I need to rest. And then I need someone else to take the ball for that period of time. What we found is women consistently, or often anyway, really value collaboration and shared leadership much more than our traditional inherited definition would have us believe. And so collaboration, listening, being willing to not know, and integrating sort of more of the parts of ourselves in leadership than the conventional leadership model.
And you're talking about integrating different parts, and in the workshops you do on cultivating women's leadership, you talk about integrating the feminine and the masculine capacities within each of us.
Yes.
So men and women integrating their feminine and masculine. What does that look like?
Well, I believe deeply that we all have masculine and feminine within us, regardless of what gender we may be physically inhabiting. And that part of what we're all reinventing right now is, what does a healthy masculine and a healthy feminine mean for any of us? Because again, it's part of a whole systems approach to understand that the world has masculine and feminine in it, so do we. And of course, the world out there reflects the world in here. So what does it mean to get in touch with your, quote, masculine capacities as a woman, which might mean your ability to stay focused, your ability to take the lead in a generative sense, your ability to stand strong for what you believe in and to make a compelling case. Those might be seen as masculine qualities within a woman. It's even, I would suggest...
And she might get called bossy.
Well, she might. I was just going to go further and say it might even be appropriate in leadership sometimes for a woman to be angry. when of course she would be called all kinds of other names. But leadership means integrating all of who we are. And in the same way, it might be appropriate for a woman in leadership to show if she's unhappy or grieve, And none of those things make us less of a leader. So I believe we've all inherited a definition of leadership that's very self-limiting and that's keeping a lot of us, particularly we women, from wholeheartedly aspiring to leadership.
Well, that's interesting you bring that up. When I was asked a few years ago to run for the presidency of a national women's journalism organization, my first reaction was, what? I can't do that. I don't know enough.
Exactly.
AKA, I'm not worthy, or whatever self-limiting story.
Yes.
This is very common
I think
for women to tell themselves
it's
that?
almost universal. And
Why?
Well, I don't know why. I think because we've been taught that to be a nice person or a good woman, we need to serve the greater good, and that part of that service involves a kind of humility. And so in my experience, I took a training called the op-ed training that was about women speaking out. And the beginning of that training, they ask you to describe what you're an expert in. And every woman in the room said, well, I'm not an expert in anything. And the truth is, we're all experts in our own lives, if not in a big body of knowledge, And so claiming our own authority is something that seems counterintuitive for how a lot of women were raised,
Going back to the sort of the masculine and feminine qualities, why is it important now to evolve the way we think of leadership, to have a more diversified idea of leadership, to address the challenges we face now?
Yeah, well, I believe, Megan, that we live at a time when the challenges that we are facing in terms of Earth's life support systems and in terms of social conflict and inequity are so huge that we're all called upon to be leaders right now. And whereas our old definition might have been a few charismatic leaders at the top and a lot of followers, I actually believe we are alive at a moment when all hands need to be on deck. And when our new definition of leadership really can include and invite every single one of us into engagement in a whole deeper, more fulfilling way than we may have imagined.
You are a co-founder of the Bioneers. I hear the Bioneers coming out in you. And that organization broadly sort of explores how nature can inform our own human systems and how we can learn from that. But what does nature tell us about diversity and leadership?
Well, what nature tells us very specifically is that ecosystems that are rich in diversity rebound much more quickly after trauma. And we all know we're living at a time when everything from the weather to the economy is erratic and very changeable. So how we cultivate our own resilience is incredibly important. And nature tells us that diversity is essential to resilience. And so I believe that that's true about not only our inner diversity, which is what we're talking about in terms of the masculine and feminine within us or all of our human capacities, but also externally in terms of our social systems. That diversity is no longer about just being politically correct. It's what we need for our social systems to be resilient and strong, and also to bring their best intelligence to the fore.
One thing I've always loved about the idea behind the Bioneers and the radio show and the other talks is that it doesn't shy away from the extraordinary challenges that we face, but it focuses very positively on people providing innovative solutions. How do you see yourself carrying that idea forward into cultivating leadership for women and for others?
Well, for one thing, I think that we are living at a time when one of our challenges is really to transcend polarization and duality. And I think that polarization and duality exists on many levels. It certainly is abundantly vivid in the partisan political realm, but also even with men and women. There is no contest about whether men or women are better or worse. Actually, we need all of us. And for a whole social system, we need men and women collaborating and bringing the best of ourselves together. This call to leadership is not only about responsibility, but it's also about having the most fulfilling and the most joyful life that you can. So simultaneously, it's about serving the common good in the best way and also having the best life we can.
That's a pretty positive message.
I think
you get
so.
to be happy while you're trying to figure this all out.
Well, you know, when I first started being acknowledged for leadership, I realized that I felt like, ooh, not me, don't call me that. And partly I felt like calling myself a leader was tantamount to painting a bullseye on my chest, you know, that leaders are the ones who are self-sacrificing, who work themselves to death, and who become a target for everyone else. And I really didn't want to do that. But I do think the redefinition of leadership is happening in a way that it can invite and include everyone. And really, those voices that have been most marginalized are the ones we perhaps need the most at this moment to restore equilibrium and diversity to our systems.
Well, let me end by asking you then, what would you suggest for people who want to try and cultivate their own leadership capacity, who might not even, as you or I, think of themselves as leaders?
You know, it's a great question, Megan, and I think part of what I've discovered through my own experience is how much implicit bias I had. And what I mean when I say that is that we're all products of a culture that teaches us certain things about what it means to be a leader, what it means to be a man or a woman. And I think that in truth, part of what's most exciting about living now is the opportunity to intentionally redefine those things. So what I would say to anyone who's watching is, there's a tremendous opportunity to unpack your own belief systems and attitudes, and to really look at, what do you understand your role as a man or a woman to be? And what is your relationship to the masculine and feminine within you and within the world? And similarly, how do you feel about leadership? And might there be some definition of leadership that could really bring together many facets of who you are in a unique way, that could be an expression of not only what the world really needs right now, but what's also most joyful for you to pursue.
Well, that's great. Nina, we're going to continue this a little bit more on the web, but I want to thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Megan. It's a pleasure to be with you.